tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Saṅghaṃ Namasami. Okay, greetings everybody. To begin the Dhamma talk today, I'd like to just reference back to Luang Liam's when he began his Dhamma talk and used a verse from the Mangala Sutta, Pujaja Pujaniyanam Eta Mangalamuttamam. So that giving, say, venerating that which is worthy of veneration. That is the highest blessing. And I think today being a remembrance day of Venerable Ajahn Chah, and certainly Ajahn Chah is one who is very much worthy of veneration. And, I think that is, of course, the reason why we're here today, and so many people have come today. And I was asked to speak on the topic of, I was given a topic of why or how did Ajahn Chah bring Buddhism to the West. And I think it's that I mean, of course, there's many reasons, but one of the things is just to reflect on, what actually brought you here today, because it's a similar thing in the sense that there's a sense of respect and a sense of gratitude and a sense of appreciation for a teaching and a pointing out of truth that is about our own experience, as opposed to just trying to memorize a book or get somebody else's view from a philosophical perspective, but it's about experience. And Ajahn Chah was one who pointed that out, and not only pointed it out, but he lived it, he embodied it. So that, I think that's something that touches all of us, and whether he is in Thailand and in his element in the northeast of Thailand, or in the West, or his teaching and his example coming to a place like Malaysia, or there's just so many, these days there are so many places where Ajahn Chah's life and teachings are really taken to heart and are lived. So that I think this aspect of his emphasizing how we live, the qualities that we develop in our life are really important. And certainly, like coming to this gathering here, it was very touching to see so many people who have made the effort to come and to beginning the day with alms round. That was there was a lot of people, and it was having the alms round. It was going through, in some areas, kind of a muddy field, and people were there either standing or kneeling and making offerings. And of course, this is something that when Luang Sumedho went to England the first time with Ajahn Chah, and one of the things that Ajahn Chah instructed or emphasized to the monks that were there were to go on alms round, and there was, of course, some speculation as to the practicality of it, and so we go out and people don't really know what we're doing, and we don't really get anything in our bowls, but then Ajahn Chah said, well, you're not going for the food or the offerings, you're going for the people. And that, in a sense, is the way that Ajahn Chah, brought Dhamma to the West and to people everywhere. Really, was that it wasn't it was giving an example and giving. It was a gift to everyone to be able to come into the presence of a samana, of one who is peaceful, and so that in that sense, the alms round in the West, it isn't a practical thing in terms of an exchange, but it's more of a gift. And similarly, today, you think, well, on a practical level, how practical was it? And you can say, well, there's pots of rice downstairs. You don't need to do that. But it's like to engage people, to have people involved, and Ajahn Chah really. That's one of his ways of being able to transmit the Dhamma, was to involve people on all different levels, and then to display an example of one who's lived the Dhamma and is living the Dhamma. So, I think that sense of Ajahn Chah being his being, his presence is something that was almost more of a teaching than the words he spoke, because that certainly is what affected us. All of us who came to live with Ajahn Chah in our early days, I don't think there was any of us early Western monks who knew any Thai language before we arrived. So on a practical level, we didn't really know what was being said or what was happening, but you felt a sense of integrity, you felt a sense of commitment, you felt a sense of, here's somebody who is living truth and a living embodiment of truth. And so that that example is a tremendous gift to the world. And his way of living it wasn't, there was a sense of ease in his being, and certainly when his first trip to the West, I wasn't there myself, but the accounts and the stories that came back, is Ajahn Chah was completely at ease, even in circumstances that were very unfamiliar, being in circumstances that were quite different than what he would have been used to in Thailand, in sense of staying at Hampstead Vihara, which is kind of a small place, crowded, and Ajahn Chah was the big Ajahn and used to having space around him and that deference, and I think it's impossible to replicate that in something like Hampstead Vihara, where everybody was on top of each other. So that sense of, but he was at ease with that. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't feel that it was a slight to him or something that was uncomfortable. And he could just adapt to things. I think that was one of the things that inspired all of us who came to live with him, because he was always at ease, and it didn't mean that he was always comfortable, and he was always everything worked out the way he wanted it. There was always difficulties. As soon as you have a monastery with many people living there, and Ajahn Chah drew people to him, and people are complicated, and they're just, that's the way human beings are, and but he was always able to adapt and to be an anchor for the community, whether it was the monks' community, the nuns' community, the lay community. He was such an anchor for everyone. And I think his that sense of being very grounded and completely comfortable with everything, and that was something that was always very inspiring for us. And in the sense of, say again, with the topic that was given to me of how did Ajahn Chah bring Dhamma or Buddhism to the West, I think one of the things that he did was to train a group of very disparate, strange Westerners who showed up at his monastery and trained them how to be monastics. That's an incredible feat. It's one of the things that I didn't ordain with Ajahn Chah. I ordained at another monastery, and then I had gone up fairly shortly after I had ordained, because I'd heard of Ajahn Chah, I'd heard of forest monasteries. I was ordained in a city monastery on the kind of the outskirts of Bangkok, and I went to pay respects, and Ajahn, the first thing that Ajahn Chah said to me, I came in, bowed, and he just sort of looked at me, didn't say anything for a while, and he said, very bluntly, if you want to stay here, you have to stay at least 5 years. And I mean, I was 24 years old. I'd been traveling. I was, wandering, kind of, just hippie, and not really much discipline or focus, and the idea of being anywhere for 5 years, and especially in a monastery, was terrifying. And so I didn't stay very long, and I left. And then I stayed at another monastery, and so I had experience in being in a couple different monasteries, and basically they kind of left you alone. You had a lot of independence to meditate and study as you wished, and that's what I thought I wanted. And I put a lot of effort into meditation and study, and I did learn something. But it was really interesting. I just kept thinking of Ajahn Chah and saying, what I really need to do is go back and give myself to Ajahn Chah. And so I did that later in the year. But so that he was willing to not to be nice to us. He wasn't trying to be buddy friends, or try to how do you say, try to be nice. He was saying, no, this is what you need, and I hadn't heard that before from anybody in my life, and so and similarly, Ajahn Sumedho, when he speaks of when he went to request to live with Ajahn Chah, then one of the things that Ajahn Chah said, well, you can stay with me here, but I can't, you have to learn how to live and fit in here. I can't look after you the way you would. You're used to being looked after in wherever, in America or wherever, and even in those days, because as you just heard from Luang Sumedho saying, he came in 1967 to stay with Ajahn Chah, and in those days, of course, he was the first Western monk who ever showed up in Ubon. The only exposure to Westerners that people had in Ubon there was a Air Force base there, American Air Force base, Vietnam War. It's actually closer to from Ubon to both Hanoi and Saigon than it was to Bangkok. So it was a fairly major fighter bomber base. So there was American, at its peak, there was about 5,000 American Air Force personnel in Ubon. They lived a very different lifestyle than Ajahn Sumedho was. But then, so lay people were concerned, that Ajahn Sumedho wouldn't be able to eat northeastern food, and so they wanted to bring him Western food, American food, and because there were the kind of shops there, so they brought, some hamburgers to Wat Pah Pong. And Ajahn Chah's response was, after they made the offering, especially for Ajahn Sumedho, and said to them, he said, don't do that again. You'll make him stupid. And it was like, because he'll gain a lot of wisdom if he learns how to adapt to everything that's here. And of course he did the same thing with the rest of us. He was willing to push us to learn how to adapt, learn how to fit in, learn how to live a very different life, and particularly living a life of Dhamma. And that sense of because there is a quality that the Buddha points to that is a very essential piece of the teaching and training, which leads to insight and understanding. And in the Pali, Dhamma no Dhamma Patibhata, practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. And this is something that, again, so Ajahn Chah embodied. I mean, he lived his practice and his life really grounded in the principles of Dhamma. And so that was the example that he set and the expectation that he set for us, so that learning how to live and practice in accordance with Dhamma. And of course that has a bigger context in the sense of so often the sense of say practicing Buddhism is kind of selective. We'll take, and especially in the West, where Buddhism is very selective. People will take what they like from this teaching, they'll patch it on to something that they like from that teaching, and then they'll forget about a whole bunch of things that they don't want to hear about, and it's not really a complete package. And of course, in order to really experience the fruits of practice, one has to practice it in the way that the Buddha taught. And so that really completing the Eightfold Path, really practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma, in the sense that because we can practice, say, meditation, but then kind of fudge the precepts a bit, have a sense of indulgence sometimes that is really not in accordance with Dhamma. But in order to really reap the fruits of it, one has to practice Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. And so I think that for myself, going to California, which is kind of like kind of the world epicenter of following whatever your own view, opinion, and preference is, rather than a tradition. People are drawn to that. One, they've heard of Ajahn Chah there, or they hear of the training that is being lived, and they're drawn to it because it's so fresh. And so you feel it on an intuitive level. On the level of our desires and preferences, sometimes we don't want to be very diligent, or we don't want to give up very much. But then when we see it lived, and sort of say Ajahn Chah was our own personal example, and then of course that's been passed on to other generations of Luang Liam, Luang Samedo, this Sangha that is continuing the practice. This is something that it's that example that is being lived is so important. So that the way that Ajahn Chah, how did Ajahn Chah bring Buddhism to the West? His willingness to train his students in a way that he felt had integrity, and in being able to for people to see the importance of that. And of course his own, when you drew close to Ajahn Chah, then you just felt a lot of trust, and yes, maybe that's one of the strongest words, is this sense of trust, that here's somebody who has lived the teachings, and he's done it in a way and transmitted in a way that he's not saying, I'm really special, you guys can try a little bit, but you're not going to make it. It's really the sense of encouraging and saying, yes, I had my difficulties, I had a hard time, but this is what the Buddha's teachings are for, is to be able to free ourselves from these entanglements and difficulties that we all have, but he was also willing to to teach in a certain uncompromising way. I don't think it's not sort of harsh and dogmatic, but he was willing to present that integrity, and if people liked it, fine, and if they didn't, fine. He wasn't trying to be liked because he was a great teacher. He wanted to, so that I think his because he only went to the West twice, and his second trip to the West, it was very interesting to see how much he, and of course this was a skill that he had, was to hone in to people and kind of intuit and understand what their needs were, what what would be useful for them, whether they wanted to hear it or not. And in his second trip, and particularly to America, he put a lot of emphasis on Sila, which is it's not especially in those days, it was the late 1970s. In America, it was actually a very indulgent time, and the how do you say, the Buddhist scene in those days, what teachings were there, nobody was teaching about Sila, about virtue, about precepts, about integrity. If they were teaching anything, it was, say, meditation technique, and then presenting that as Buddhism, with a few bits of wisdom teachings tacked on. And Ajahn Chah just spent a lot of time saying, no, this is really important. I was actually in one of the talks that he gave. He actually, translated. He said, you're not going to want to hear this, but the Buddha told me to tell you this. and that talk on the and so that sense for those who had ears to hear, who opened their hearts to it, it really changed them. And there were people who I've had met over the years who, a few of them show up at Abhayagiri in California and say, I was at that IMS retreat, and I remember Ajahn Chah saying, and he said it was really, really interesting, how much that presence was there. And it's something that he was able to he had tremendous presence, and so even if he was telling you something that you didn't want to hear, similar with myself, it was like in Ajahn Chah telling me, you really want to practice, you have to, 5 years and don't think about anything else. And I didn't want to hear it, but that it just percolated out over time. Say, yeah, that's really what I have to do, and similarly with his teachings, I met a Tibetan monk. I was on pilgrimage in India, and that was in about 1990, and a Tibetan monk had been in England at the Manjushri Institute, where Ajahn Chah gave a talk. I think he spent a night or two, and he heard that there was an Ajahn Chah monastery. His monastery was nearby. This was in Sarnath, and he came and said, I just wanted to pay respects to you and to express to you how fortunate I think you are and how fortunate I feel that I was able to meet Ajahn Chah and hear him speak in person, and how it's still affecting me in my holy life and living different tradition, different teaching, but when there's, I say that practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma, or living truth in accordance with truth, it has a transformative effect. And again, it's important to recognize that is something that is, it's not, say, just Ajahn Chah or him transmitting teachings to the West, but it's an example that is available to all of us to be able to pick up the Buddha's teaching and the Buddha's training and to live it in our lives. Because that's, something that Ajahn Chah would never give credit to, say, himself on a personal level, in a sense that when somebody would, say, praise him as a teacher or praise him as a leader, then I said, it all comes back to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. It all comes back to the traditional refuges. It all comes back to the Triple Gem. We are living with the blessings of the Buddha. We're fortunate to have the contact and access to the Triple Gem and the teachings and the blessings that the Buddha has given to the world for us to plug into. And that's something that, so often his teaching would always, it was always very practical, but it was always so often just come straight back to Four Noble Truths, which was the Buddha's first teaching. It was, and it's the heart of the Buddha's teaching. It's what, Sariputta says in his, the simile of the elephant's footprint, that all of the teachings that the Buddha gives fit into the Four Noble Truths in the same way that all of the footprints of all various animals fit within the footprint of an elephant. And so Ajahn Chah would always come back to these Four Noble Truths, and not in a doctrinal way or a philosophical way, but in a very practical way. And I can remember for myself being with Ajahn Chah and having had some difficulty and problem and struggling, and his response was, is it suffering? Because what happens when we have some difficulty or problem, either we project it externally onto the problem is this person, this situation, this world, this culture, whatever, we put it outside, or we project it internally in the sense of it's my problem, it's me, it's my difficulty, it's my dysfunctional personality. It's, we come up with whatever psychological diffusions, but we don't ever look at the experience. We objectify it, so that just that guiding of, is that suffering? And you think, and you realize, I've never really looked at it in the way, yes, it's suffering, but I've always pushed it away somehow, so I don't really have to feel it, really have to experience it. And Ajahn Chah was willing to, and saw the brilliance of the Buddha's teaching of, when we come back to this fundamental experience of dukkha, whether and suffering is a very inadequate translation because it has many textures of discontent, dissatisfaction, stress, imperfection, whatever. But to be able to see that and to acknowledge, there it is. And, of course, when you look at it from that framework, that gives you the tools to start saying, well, now, how does the cessation of suffering work? How do I experience the end of suffering? And And this is something that in terms of, again, of the Ajahn Chah's example, which was, in terms of a transmission, bringing Buddhism to the West or to anywhere, he was, one time he was asked by a group of Westerners, and some of them were teachers of Buddhism in the West. They were all meditators, and asking him what special quality did he have that allowed him to experience the fruits of the practice, to realize the path of practice. And Ajahn Chah said, really, there isn't anything that special, but maybe one thing that I was able to rely on, he said, was I was willing to dare to do it. In that sense of, and that again, a sense of, just think, I was willing to dare to do it, in the sense of, willing to dare to keep the precepts, willing to dare to actually sit and watch my own mind, willing to dare to apply the teachings to experience. And that example has transformed, so many people. Those of us who are sitting here are inspired by those the monastics, the lay community, and all around the world. And that example of somebody who has reaped the fruits of the practice, but has done it because they've been willing to live Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. So it's an example for us to take with us as well. So I'll offer that for reflection this afternoon.